that stood out to you guys about it that you wanted to talk about at all? Other than, oh my goodness. Right. This lesson is about the time of the Gentiles. That's exactly right. Yes. Big differentiation between those two, right? Those two groups, the Gentiles and the Jews. Right. Yep. Right. Right. That's right. Well, this is really the wedding feast. We're going to talk about that because Jesus is talking about this, right, in Matthew 22. The third invitation is when? When is the third? Right? But it really is in the end times, isn't it? And they don't refuse that one, do they? Yeah, that's the third invitation. They do not refuse that one. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's start. We're going to pray, and we're going to be in Matthew and in Romans, and then there's some other scripture in Zechariah. And you know how I love Zechariah, but there's a lot going on in this lesson, and this is why Revelation gets hard to teach, because it's just a lot to cover, and it's a very important foundation, I think, for understanding the rest of what we're going to be talking about. So let's pray. So Father, thank you so much. Thank you for today. Thank you for our salvation. That's the thing that keeps going through my mind over and over again. I am saved. We know you. We have the assurance of salvation. We have the assurance of an eternal future. We have a hope that will never fail. And yet, Father, we live in a world that is falling so rapidly, it just boggles the mind. But yet, these are all things that you knew from the foundation. And so I just ask you, Father, to help us as we go through the process of understanding what you have to say to us today in these verses, that you would just enrich us mightily and show us completely what you want us to know about yourself. And I just thank you, Father, for this moment, this time, that we were, as Esther was said, for such a time as this, we were called to this time, not 100 years ago, not 100 years from now, right now. You created each of us for this time. And we ask you, Father, to help us walk according to your purposes and plans that you have for us today. I thank you and praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. All righty. So Matthew 22, those are the main verses, right? And so what do we see happening in Matthew? Who's talking? And how is he talking? A parable. And what is a parable? Okay, but it's using, yes, it is a story. Thank you very much. Okay, it's an illustrative story, but he's using things that are familiar. So parables are going to be familiar to the audience. So those people understand what he's talking about, right? And is it familiar to us? So this is something that is really, really important, that we not try to make it say something it doesn't say, right? Okay, and we know in Matthew 21, 42 through 44, it says that they rejected the cornerstone, right? So Matthew 21, we're just going to kind of put it in parentheses because he's now the next chapter, right? Matthew 21, 42 through 44, they rejected the cornerstone. And it's important to remember that because that's going to matter as I disappear off the screen now. Sorry. That's going to matter as we talk about these 3 times that there was an invitation. That would have been the first one, right? And so he says, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding feast for his son. You know, have you ever thought about how profound that statement is? It just blows me away. It's what are weddings? Weddings are happy. Weddings are celebrations. Weddings are union. They're communion. They're oneness. 2 become 1. That's what a wedding is. And so he's saying the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a wedding feast that the king gives for his son. And so when a king gives a wedding feast, I mean, anybody watch the wedding of Kate and what's his name? William and Kate? How about Charles and Diana? How spectacular were those weddings? How spectacular do you think our wedding's going to be? Better than that. More better than that. So when we think about this, this just for us as believers, what should that do for us? Okay, so weddings are planned. They are looked, I can spell really, I've had a long week, so I'm looked forward to, right? You look forward to it. It's anticipated. Anticipated. It is, there's a lot of work involved, right? Think about, anybody throwing a wedding for, okay, huh? Many. Okay, planned, look forward to, anticipated, it's work. What? What else is it? Okay, oh, all right. Exciting. Is this how we look at our Christian walk? Should we be looking at it like this? This is a good enough example, I think. I mean, it's something to really think about. It's an important thing to recognize that when he says the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding feast for his son. Weddings say you matter. What a wedding does, it says, I am important to the king. I'm important. I matter. Verse 3 says, and he sent out his slaves to call those who had been invited to the wedding feast, and they were unwilling to come. So this is the invitation of who? Verse 3 is the invitation to who? It's a national invitation. He's saying, you're important to me and I'm inviting you, right? But how did they get the invitation initially? The national invite to the Jews is why? Because of covenant. He had promised that to them. So really, if it just strikes me sometimes how simple the gospel is, but from Genesis on, this wedding has been planned. This invitation was right from the start. So they were unwilling. They were not any of these things, even though it was planned, even though they were looking forward to it, even though it was anticipated and exciting. There was work, stress, and anxiety connected to it, and they were unwilling. Yeah. Food's going to be good. The music will be awesome, right? It'll be fun. They did not respond. Matthew 24, they rejected the cornerstone. Verse 4, again he sent out other slaves, saying, tell those who have been invited, behold, I prepared my dinner. My oxen, my fattened livestock are all butchered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding feast. But they paid no attention and went their way, one to his own farm, another to his business. And the rest seized his slaves and mistreated them and killed them. Yeah. Wow. Really, verses 3 through 8 is really showing how patient God is. What period of time do you think this covers? From verse 3 to 8. From Genesis all the way to the cross. It is. It's from Genesis all the way to the cross. So when you see he sent out other slaves, who are these other slaves? Who else is God sending out? He sent out that first group of slaves. Who do you think they might be? How about Noah, Abraham, prophets? Think about the people who served the Lord from Genesis on. These are the slaves that were sent out. So from verse 3 to verse 8, we're talking about from Genesis to the cross. And really even after that. But that's where the big change came. He says, some, they paid no attention. They went to their businesses, to their farms, and the rest seized his slaves and mistreated them and killed them. But the king was enraged and sent his armies and destroyed those murderers and set their city on fire. Remember, it's a parable. So what happened to Israel? What happened we looked at Isaiah. Why did Isaiah occur? Why did all these things happen, all these prophecies? What was the problem with Israel? They kept rejecting, didn't they? Idol worship, worshiping idols, doing all of these things that were against God. And God kept saying, I'm coming for you. I'm trying to help you. If you will follow me, if you will obey me, I will bless you. If you will not, you will find the curse. So this is what these verses are talking about. From Genesis to the cross, all these people. And when God sends his armies, who are the armies that he sends in the Old Testament? Other nations. So, and we know that's true because why? Why is that? Why do we know that that's true? How should this change our perspective about what's happening? What's happening to the United States right now? I mean, where should we start? And when we see other nations become highly successful over us, and why is that happening? Because we refuse to listen. And so God is saying, I'm going to take my army and I'm going to use my army. We should understand that what we're looking at when we see things like this are situations where, sorry, my hair is coming off. Situations where God is using people and armies and nations against his children because we are being disobedient. Not you and me, but this nation. So when we see that going on, we need to pay attention. This is God's judgment. This is God saying right here, I'm going to punish you, right? Now, why is he punishing? What is it that he wants to have happen as a result of his punishment? To get their attention, right? So, verse 8, this is a transition. And this is going to be after the cross. So this transition says, the wedding is ready, but those who are invited are not worthy. And to be worthy is to meet a standard, right? Worthy is a term for a standard. And so if you're rejecting the Father, you're rejecting the Son, and these people did not meet the standard. He says, go therefore to the main highways, and as many as you find there, invite to the wedding feast. And those slaves went out into the streets and gathered together all they found, both good and evil. And the wedding hall was filled with dinner guests. Now, what distinguishes these people as being invited? What lets you know that they've been invited? Of this group, when we get after verse 8, verse in 9 and 10, okay? Okay, he says, good and evil. He found both the people on the streets, gathered them together, good and evil. What does he mean by good and evil, do you think? I don't think so. Because what is it that he says? Because can evil people go to the wedding feast? Why? Okay, what is the next verse? But when the king came in to look over the dinner guests, he saw there was a man not dressed in wedding clothes. And he said, friend, how did you come in here without wedding clothes? And he was speechless. Then the king said to the servants, bind him hand and foot and cast him into the outer darkness. In that place there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are called, but few are chosen. Okay, so 9 through 14 are talking about something very important here. Good and evil people are invited. Now, what's the standard of good and evil? I go see evil people every Monday. Okay, they're good people in there. They're saved people. I don't think he's talking about saved and unsaved. Who's he teaching here? Who's the group that's hearing? Jews and Pharisees, and what would they consider to be good? Okay, why? Why were they considered good? Thank you. They were keeping the law, those who follow the law and those who do not follow the law. Because what is going on here with these two groups? Why would the Jews? Because remember, this is familiar. This is a wedding that says, I'm important to the king. They're invited because of covenant. What is it that Jews say about themselves? Covenant keeping people. We're the only ones who ought to be in there, right? And yet they're not. Right, because they rejected the cornerstone of all of that, right? He was not saved. That was somebody. Now that is a whole nother thing that right, he was not properly dressed. Okay. Okay, who is this? Remember, a parable is a picture that is being taught. It's not going to always make complete sense in every single, you know what I mean? It's like there are parts of it like, I don't get that. Why would that be? But they would understand that. They would understand that there are people, what he is saying is you may think you're dressed appropriately for the wedding, but God knows your heart. Oh yeah. He knew that they knew the Pharisees knew that he was pointing out them as whitewashed tomb. You look good on the outside, but God knows your heart. That's really what he's trying to say there. Yeah. Right. It's a person. He's talking, I think, really and truly, he's talking Jews and Gentiles, is what I think he's talking about. No, no, it's everybody is unsaved without Christ. Exactly. We know that's right. People sitting in churches are still going to hell if they have not, if they are showing up but not dressed in the clothes of, what did we study in part one? What does the white robes represent? Righteousness, right? Right? So if you're not dressed, so who provides the clothes? The king, because it's his feast. And he's telling me, you're important to me. I'm going to dress you appropriately for this event because you did not reject the cornerstone. You didn't reject him. So these all people, everyone is invited. This is what? John 3:16. For God so loved the world. Right? So, well, what does a wedding represent? Two become one. Okay? They would really understand that. The clothes, Galatians 3:27, clothes refer to sanctification. So good and evil people are invited. The white robe is salvation. That's what he's talking about. So here's the thing. This is the thing about Revelation that I think is so amazing. No matter what or where or how much we know or don't know about this book, it still boils down to the foundation of you must be saved. It is not by works. It is by grace. And so no matter whether we understand this or not, we know that we have been invited and God is blessing us to do that. He says in verse 14, many are called, but few are chosen. Remember Luke 19, we talked about last week, and when he approached, he saw the city and wept over it, saying, if you had known in this day, even you, the things which make for peace. But now they've been hidden from your eyes, for the day shall come upon you, and your enemies will throw up a bank before you and surround you and hem you in on every side, and will level you to the ground, and your children within you, and they will not leave one stone upon another. That actually happened in AD 70. So the difference between this and other verses that talk about going to the hills and so on and so forth is that in AD 70, the Jews ran to the temple for protection from the Roman soldiers because they thought it was going to protect them. And many people inside that synagogue were burned to the ground along with it. It was tragic. So we also see that we're going to look at Luke 21. So it starts with verse 7, and they questioned him, saying, Teacher, when therefore will these things be, and what will be the sign when these things are about to take place? And then he goes on. Jesus says, don't be misled. Many will come in my name, saying, I am he, and the time is at hand. Do not go after them. And when you hear of wars and disturbances, do not be terrified, for these things must take place first, but the end does not follow immediately. Then he continued by saying to them, nations will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be great earthquakes, and in various places plagues and famines, and there will be terrors and great signs from heaven. So that stuff is starting to happen. There was just a big earthquake I heard this morning. In California, there was a big one. Yeah, but it was something like a 6 or 7 somewhere. I can't remember. I could look on my phone. Oh man, it is definitely continuing to erupt too. Yeah, lots of stuff like that happened. Flooding. Yeah. Wow. So let's so verses, let's say 7 through 11, disaster in many places on earth. That's what's going to be happening. And then there's also going to be false prophets saying, follow me. There's going to be horrible things happening. But then we get to this very interesting section in Luke, verses 12 through, let's say, 19. And these verses are some of the verses we really need to pay attention to. It says, but before all these things, they will lay their hands on you and will persecute you, delivering you to the synagogues and prisons, bringing you before kings and governors for my name's sake. When did that start happening? When did that start happening? With the apostles, right? That started happening with the apostles. They were being delivered. What happened to Peter and John? Weren't they brought before the Sanhedrin? And they rejoiced for the opportunity to be beaten for the sake of Christ. Boy, I sure hope I have that attitude. I hope. Right. 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 That's right. Absolutely. Right. Right. Well, see, remember, we're supposed to be paying attention to some things. We need to pay attention that these are signs. And then we need to be paying attention that one of the things that are going to be happening and is already happening, it just hasn't happened here very much, but it's going to start. Let's just say that I'll just put this ridiculous scenario that I know will never happen. I mean, I don't think it will ever happen. I better be careful when I say that. The current administration are all on a plane together, which would never happen. They crash into the sea and it's over with. And we get every person that we could ever dream of to be the best of the best, whatever, in control of our country. What would that do? Won't change this. It won't change this. So that tells me that we need to quit worrying about. I'm not saying that we shouldn't care. I definitely am a voter. I believe we should vote. But what I'm saying is we do our best to give as much opportunity to serve the Lord here until it's over. That's really what we're doing. We're saying, not working. You are exactly right. I want to be working. Verse 13, here he just says it. It will lead to an opportunity for your testimony. So what we need to know is that persecution leads to opportunity. It leads to opportunity for your testimony. So make up your minds not to prepare beforehand to defend yourself. What do you think he means by that? What does he mean? Well, God will defend us, but how does he defend? But what are we supposed to be doing? What he's saying is all you need is a testimony. I want us to really think about that. Testimony is all you need. When you're in that situation, any highly intellectual, and do we like to wax philosophical and intellectual about things? What is it that people cannot deny? They can't deny your testimony. And if you are being persecuted, I don't need to defend my faith. I don't need to say, oh, yes, well, you don't really understand what you believe. Look, I go through a lot of defending of the faith at the prison every week. I mean, there's always some, person who's going to ask me some kind of crazy question, and I have to answer in a technical way that question. But that is, the truth is that the only thing that we really have, we really, really have. Well, sometimes I've had some confrontational things happen. I've definitely had some confrontational things happen. And in those cases, depending on what it is, I have to be pretty firm. Sometimes I have to be really like, man, I'd go in there and I'm not going to let you do that, Yeah. Yeah. But the reality is that we have not been tested. We have not gone through persecution. Nobody has come in yet and drug us out into the street. When they drag you into the street and they're going to chop your head off, what are you going to be saying? Well, let me explain to you the doctrinal stasis for blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to be saying that. It's what is my testimony. I'm so glad. Right. Well, I think that's a lot about the guy that comes in over here. Like he had an understanding, but he didn't have a relationship. And I think that is very important to understand. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That is the truth. He says, "For I will give you utterance and wisdom which none of your opponents will be able to resist or refute, which is your testimony." Nobody can resist it. Nobody can refute it. But you will be delivered up, even by parents and brothers and relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. And you will be hated by all on account of my name. Yet not a hair of your head will perish. By your endurance, you will gain your lives. You will live eternally. You're going to live. You're going to live. That's a good thing to know. So these next verses talk about when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation is at hand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let those who are in the midst of the city depart. This is the midpoint of the tribulation, chapter 11 and 12. Because these days of vengeance, in order that all things which are written may be fulfilled. Woe to those who are with child and those who nurse babies in those days, for there will be a great distress upon the land and wrath to this people. And they will fall by the edge of the sword and will be led captive into all the nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. All righty, so we have that little statement right there. Well, I think we're just called the sons and daughters of God. And so he is saying that all people are invited. And when you have a white robe of salvation, then you are not in really, I don't think you're in the Gentile camp or the Jewish camp. You're in the church camp. We've gone to camp, and it's at church. Does that make sense what I'm saying? No, armies. That there is the other thing that we talked about, that is the destruction of Jerusalem, but the armies was what we see in chapter 19 of Revelation, when the armies surround the city. I know it's very confusing to me. She was asking if that was AD 70 or was that Revelation, because one of them talks about, one of those quotes talk about in 24, 25 is Jerusalem of Matthew. But this, I believe, this is what I believe, is the Revelation. So Matthew 21, verse 23. This is 2 days before the cross. And I think this is really interesting to me because it shows worldly reasoning. And when he, Jesus, had come into the temple, the chief priests and the elders of the people came to him as he was teaching and said, "By what authority are you doing these things? And who gave you this authority?" Matthew 21, verse 23. Matthew 21:23. Sorry, back to Matthew. Verse 24. And Jesus answered and said to them, I will ask you one thing too, which if you tell me, I will also tell you by what authority I do these things. Oh, sorry, Matthew 22. Sorry, didn't mean to confuse you there. Matthew 22, I got the wrong description there, sorry. Is it Matthew 20? It's Matthew 21. Okay. Verse 25. The baptism of John, from what source? From heaven or from men? What source? Let me ask you this. That's what Jesus is saying. And they began reasoning among themselves, saying, if we say from heaven, he will say, then why did you not believe him? But if we say from men, we fear the multitude, for they all hold John to be a prophet. And answering Jesus, they said, we do not know. He also said to them, neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things. So, not sincere questions. Is this a good example of what we talked about? Not trying to defend yourself? See, now this is intellectual because they are trying to say, where is real, what is true authority? That's what they're saying. And he's saying, okay, you learned men, you tell me, what is a true example of God in a person's life? You tell me that John the Baptist isn't a great example of God delivering people from their sin. Very interesting. So then he goes to this whole long thing about a man had two sons, and he came to the first and said, son, go work today in the vineyard. And he answered and said, I will. And he didn't go. And he came to the second and said the same thing, but he answered and said, I will not. Yet afterwards he regretted it and went. Which of the two did the Father's will? They said the latter. Jesus said to them, truly I say to you that the tax gatherers and harlots will get into the kingdom of God before you. Ouch. Here's another parable. A landowner who planted a vineyard, verse 33, and put a wall around it and dug a wine press in it and built a tower and rented it out to vine growers and went on a journey. Did we not read this in Isaiah chapter 5? And when the harvest time approached, he sent his slaves out to the vine growers to receive his produce. And the vine growers took his slaves and beat one and killed another and stoned a third. Wonderful guys. And he set down another group of slaves larger than the first, and they did the same thing to them. But afterwards he sent his own son to them, saying, they will respect my son. But when the vine growers saw the son, they said among themselves, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him and seize his inheritance. And they took him and threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. So let me just stop right there. What were the Pharisees trying to do? Why did they oppose Jesus so much? Okay, well, what was wrong with the status quo? They wanted power, it was corrupted, so they were willing to sacrifice the prophets, right? The son, whatever it took to keep their power. Does this sound familiar? Sobering, isn't it? It's well, They understood that he was talking about them. That's for darn sure. They sure understood that. Pharisees wanted the place that Jesus held as the Son. And Jesus commanded that authority without ever trying, right? He confounded the wise. And he goes on, he says, in verse 42, Jesus said to them, did you never read the scriptures? The stone which the stone which the builders rejected, this became the chief cornerstone. This came about from the Lord, and is it marvelous in our eyes? Therefore I say to you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and will be given to a nation producing the fruit of it. The fruit of what? The scriptures, the Spirit, the word of God, the character of who God is. And he who falls on this stone will be broken to pieces, but on whomever it falls, it will scatter him like dust. And when the chief priests and Pharisees heard his parables, they understood that he was speaking about them. And when they sought to seize him, when they sought to seize him, I can speak eventually, they feared the multitude because the multitude held him to be a prophet. Well, here's the thing. What is the question? What is the question we should be asking right now? Here's our question. Do I listen to the right things? Okay, next question. Am I willing to repent? When God reveals sin in my life. Now that might sound so easy, but it's not. Because what is our tendency? What's our tendency? Right. And so if we could change, so what is it that we are learning here? What are we learning? In Luke 21, what is it teaching us? What is our real focus supposed to be? Our testimony. And so, and what kind of testimony do we have? Okay, so we're talking end times lifestyle here, right? Understanding that things are not going to be the way they always used to be. Now, should we know? I mean, we're in this study. We should be studying. We should be learning. And we should be knowing what the word says. But what is the real focus going to be? We're going to have persecution that's going to lead to an opportunity for the testimony that we'll live forever. Okay? Yes, to lose my life is to gain eternity. So the thing is that we want to learn from this foolishness over here and understand that it is not hard to fall into their trap when they get a little power. You know, I mean, anybody in leadership, does this tell us how to pray for people in leadership? It really does. It points out to us that the pressure and the difficulties and the things that can happen that can get us off track. And when we get off track, are we willing to hear that we are? Are we willing to hear that? Yeah. Yes. Because he's saying, you know, there's a consequence, you know, and we need to listen. We need to make sure of what we're listening to. And when God shows us something, be willing to repent. so that we can be this person. Because who's counting on us? All those who are looking for a witness. Now, I can't save anybody, but I can be committed to the evidences of my own salvation, which is a testimony to people. And that's a good thing. Oh, that's right. Exactly. Exactly. And you remember the exchange of robes, right? First 18, I think it is. Jonathan and David made an eternal covenant forever. And they exchanged clothes. They did a robe exchange. They exchanged weapons. And it's a picture of Ephesians where Jesus exchanges his robe for our robe. We get his righteousness and he takes our unrighteousness to the cross. It's an incredible picture. It is. It's incredible. So, what are we doing? Okay, we're doing good. We're really doing good. So now let's talk about Zechariah. Zechariah 12, and I didn't even write, I wrote Matthew 21 over here and then I put it over there. So let me take it off. All right, Zechariah 12 and Romans 11. So chapter 12 and chapter 13. What do we learn about the shepherd? What do we learn about Israel, I should say? Or I'm going to say the covenant people of Israel. This group of people, we learn something about them in Zechariah 12 and 13. Zechariah 12:10, they will mourn for him as for an only son, right? And 13:7 says, awake, O sword, against my shepherd and against the man, my associate, declares the Lord of hosts. Strike the shepherd, that the sheep may be scattered, and I will turn my hand against the little one. So there is a sword to strike the shepherd. And what does it cause? The sheep scatter. And he also says, my hand is against them. My hand is against that sheep. Do you see why? This is in Zechariah. And it's also in Revelation. Revelation, where do we see that Revelation? Oh, yes, the remnant. I'm sorry. Okay, because I was like, wait, we haven't gotten there yet. Okay. So this is also referred to in Ezekiel 5, 1 through 12. And it says in verse 8, it will come about in all the land, declares the Lord, that 2 parts in it will be cut off and perish, but the third will be left in it. So 1/3 of the sheep are left, And then verse 9 says, and I will bring the third part through the fire. They go through the fire. Refine them as silver is refined, and test them as gold is tested. They will call on my name, and I will answer them. I will say, they are my people, and they will say, the Lord is my God. So God will save them. This is where it talks about the 1/3 of Israel is saved. When does that happen? Revelation 19 is when Jesus returns. That's what that's talking about. We also see it in Matthew when they leave, when they take off and they leave and head for the mountains that we just talked about. Okay, so we're going to talk more about this. Remember, there's a part 4. Just letting you guys know. There's a part 4. So we have Romans 11, and then we have, I need to put down 1 Corinthians 15, 1 through 9. So we'll get these two in here. I don't even know how I do it sometimes with these boards. I don't know how I teach. I teach on a little overhead projector at the prison. You should see it. It's a disaster. So verses 1 through 10 of Romans 11. What is that about? Let's get to Romans. Let's see, Romans 11. Then I saw God has not rejected his people, has he? May it never be. For I too am an Israelite, a descendant of Abraham, of the tribe of Benjamin. God has not rejected his people whom he foreknew. Or do you not know what the scriptures say in the passage about Elijah, how he pleads with God against Israel? Lord, they've killed your prophet. This is what Elijah's saying. They have torn down your altars, and I alone am left, and they are seeking my life. What is the divine response to him? I have kept for myself 7,000 men who have not bowed the knee to Baal. You know, it just never struck me until I started doing this. What is going on here? And how even things like this are teaching us end time prophecy. I never saw that. So verse 5 says, in the same way then, there has also come to be at the present time a remnant according to God's gracious choice, God's unmerited favor. But if it is by grace, it is no longer on the basis of works. Otherwise, grace is no longer grace. That's what they're talking about over there. What then? What Israel is seeking, it has not obtained, but those who were chosen obtained it, and the rest were hardened. So this is talking about those hardened and those chosen. Okay, it goes on. He says, just as it is written, God gave them a spirit of stupor, eyes to see not, and ears to hear not, down to this very day. And David says, let their table become a snare and a trap and a stumbling block and a retribution to them. Let their eyes be darkened and see not, and bend their backs forever. Wow. Those hardened Jews, those chosen, all who believe. There are Jews who believe, right? Because the 12 disciples are Jews. So, verse 11 through 15 is what the next part. So 11 says, I say then, they did not stumble so as to fall, did they? May it never be. But by their transgression, salvation has come to the Gentiles to make them jealous. Now, if their transgression is riches for the world and their failure is riches for the Gentiles, how much more will their fulfillment be? But I'm speaking to you who are Gentiles, inasmuch then as I am an apostle of Gentiles, I magnify my ministry. If somehow I might move to jealousy my fellow countrymen and save some of them, for if their rejection is the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead? So the Jews, the Jewish rejection is the salvation of the world. That's really what he's saying. Let me just ask you to think about something here. Was this part of God's plan? Was this part of God's plan? Let's just think about this a second. How much does God want a relationship with us? To sacrifice his son, sacrifice his covenant, sacrifice his people, so that all people would know. And so when we read, God causes all things to work together for good, this is talking about that. How he takes this group of people here who reject and works it for good, not only for us, but actually for these people. But that's exactly. I think it's so powerful. I think it is so amazing how God does this, how he takes this truth and turns it into this incredible picture of his mercy for all mankind. I mean, I think that's incredible. I do. I think it just really blows me away. So we know that the gospel came to the Jews first, right? In Acts, we see that the Gentiles believe and are baptized in the same way that the Jews are in Acts 2. John 10:16, there are other sheep besides the Jews. Ephesians 2, no distinction between the Jew and the Gentile. Galatians 3, the Gentiles were always a part of the plan of God. How do we know that? Who was Abraham? When did he become a Jew? Genesis chapter 17 was circumcised, when he was circumcised, right? Because that's the covenant. That's the covenant he made. Your people will be my people, and I will, so on and so forth, right? But when did he become righteous? Genesis 15. What, 25 years before? He was a Gentile when he believed. And Galatians 3 says he believed in the seed, which was Christ, because you only get saved one way. Isn't that amazing? Salvation came to the world, and then God made a chosen people. But they were not chosen because they were good. They were chosen for the seed. I just think that's pretty amazing. So 16 through 25 of Romans, if I can get my page to go there. 16 says, if the first piece of dough is holy, the lump is also. And if the root is holy, the branches are too. This is talking about covenant. But some of the branches are cut off, were broken off, and you, being a wild olive, were grafted in among them and became a partaker with them of the rich root of the olive tree. Do not be arrogant towards the branches, but if you are arrogant, remember that it is not you who supports the root, but the root supports you. You will say then, branches were broken off so that I might be grafted in. Quite right. They were broken off for their unbelief, but you stand by your faith. Do not be conceited, but fear. For if God did not spare the natural branches, he will not spare you either. Behold the kindness and the severity of God to those who fell, severity. But to you, God's kindness. If you continue in his kindness, otherwise you will also be cut off. And they also, if they do not continue in their unbelief, will be grafted in, for God is able to graft them in again. For if you were cut off from what is by nature, a wild olive tree, and were grafted contrary to nature into a cultivated olive tree, how much more will these who are natural branches be grafted into their own olive tree? For I do not want you, brethren, to be uninformed of this mystery, so that you will not be wise in your own estimation, that a partial hardening has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. So what is that telling us? What does that say? You're what? So the fullness of the Gentiles, what does that mean? When it says he's talking about fullness, what is he talking about there? Yeah. Right. And when will that happen? When do we know that that happens in Revelation? At Armageddon. Chapter 19. That's right. Nope, that's a totally different thing. Okay. And so, verse 26, all Israel will be saved, just as it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion. He will remove ungodliness from Jacob. This is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. From the standpoint of the gospel, they are enemies for your sake. But from the standpoint of God's choice, they are beloved for the sake of the fathers. For the gifts and callings of God are irrevocable. For just as you were once, as you once were disobedient to God, but now have been shown mercy because of their disobedience, so these also now have been, who have been disobedient, that because of the mercy shown to you, they may also now be shown mercy. So he is saying something really important. He is not forgetting his people. Okay, now there's a part 4. So, so I'm just going to say we're talking about. This is the other thing, is that the Jews who are alive on the earth during the tribulation period, some of those people are going to stay in Jerusalem and worship the beast. But there's going to be a percentage of them, which I think is about a third of the Jews alive at that time, are going to flee for Petra. And they're going to be hidden for 3.5 years. Well, the 144,000 will probably be there, but I think they're going to be also talking to the Jews in Jerusalem. I think they're going to be all in that area. I don't believe the 144,000 have any other mission but Israel. That's what I think. That's what I personally think. There's no way for me to prove that. Okay. I haven't come across anything that says that's the case. But the reason I feel that is because of these covenants that are going on. And so God says in Jeremiah 31 through 34, your sins and your lawless deeds I will remember no more. And I will take your heart of stone and make it heart of flesh. And I'll write my laws on your heart. And you will no longer have to go to one another saying, know the Lord, for you all know the Lord. Jeremiah 31, 31 through 34. That covenant is fulfilled in Revelation. Now, there are Jews who believe, obviously. There's Jewish believers. But that's not the only, I mean, there are just tons of covenants in the Old Testament that talk about the restoration and confirmation. Zechariah is a big book on the restoration of Israel. I mean, that's a huge thing going on. So the thing to understand about, just like when we looked at Daniel, the first, Daniel 9, 24 through 27, the first three things talked about are at the cross. The next three things that talked about are at the end of time, basically, the end, when all these things come to fruition. So for Gentiles, we're going to talk about, I guess it's next week or the week after, we're going to talk about the original covenants where Israel prayed for the Gentile nations way back, and that got thrown away by the Pharisees and the Sadducees in Jesus's day. They didn't do that anymore. But originally, they were praying for all the nations of the world to be within that covenant. So that was something that was going on. We'll talk about that a little bit. So we know that there's a partial hardening until the Lord returns these people. Okay, 10 minutes left. Now, yes. It's all the Israel at that time. Oh boy, that's true. So yes, that is yes, I agree. The nation of Israel, or the land, the promised land that was given to Abram in Genesis 12, the reason for the millennial reign is because that's the only time that 100% of the land is occupied by Israel. All Israel people that are at the end of Revelation 19, okay, and all the land. That's the only time. There is never a time before that Israel occupies 100% of the promised land. That happens in the millennial reign. That's the only time it happens. So before that, even with the when we saw the picture in chapter 11 of Revelation, we see that the temple is occupied by the Jews, but the court is occupied by the Gentiles. So the Jews are not in control of Jerusalem, are they? Just the temple, even in the tribulation period. The Antichrist is king, and he is the one who rules. There was an interesting discussion. I can't remember who asked me. Oh, it was Pam. We were talking about, people say that they think he's going to be a Jew. I personally think he's going to have either his father or his mother is going to be Jewish, and the other one's going to be Islamic. I think it's going to be a combination of the two, because it would be very difficult for the Muslims to agree to the rebuilding of the temple if there wasn't some way. And I also think, and this is just according to Cathy, okay? So y'all don't, yes. So we have the Wailing Wall right here, let's say, okay? The Temple Mount is on this side. I think the Temple Mount is going to stay here, right? Okay, and the Wailing Wall will become a part of the new temple. That's what I think is going to happen. There's been a lot of people that talk about it. It has to be on this site, but all they really need is that Wailing Wall. I think that's where they're going to build it personally, so that they have a cohabitation with the Muslims. That's what I think is going to happen. They're going to be right next to each other. And that's why I think that when he talks about, this is just me saying this, that's why when he talks about the Gentiles have the court, I think that's what he's referring to. Could be wrong, probably am, but we're going to find out eventually, right? Well, no. So 1 Corinthians 15:1. Now I make known to you, brethren, the gospel which I preached to you, which also you received, in which you stand, by which also you were saved, if you hold fast the word which I preached to you, unless you believed in vain. For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, and he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas and to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 brethren at one time, most of whom remain until now, but some have fallen asleep. And then he appeared to James, and then to all the apostles. And last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared to me also. For I am the least of the apostles, who am not fit to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. But by the grace of God, I am what I am, and his grace towards me did not prove vain. But I labored even more than all of them, yet not I, but the grace of God with me. What is he saying there? What is Paul saying? By God's grace, we are saved. We are what we are. Now, is he saying that like, I see these bumper stickers that say, God's not finished with me yet. I am what I am. Is that what he's saying? What is it that verse is really saying? When you put it in the context of all this, what is he saying? How does this relate to these guys here? The marriage. So God loves us as we are, but he loves us enough to not leave us there. That's really what he's saying. Yes, I did do these things, but I'm not going to stay that person, because does God have a plan? What does he have for us? What's the plan for us? See if I can get the right color. A wedding, an eternal wedding, exciting, life-changing, two become one. When we have to look at disaster and things that are going to be difficult, we need to really focus on what's coming after. We have to do that today. In the church, there's a lot of depressed people, a lot of scared people, a lot of people who are shaken in their faith, or who think, what did I do to deserve this? How did this happen to me? Why is God doing this to me? What's wrong? Why can't I get it? What is it that we are going to say to those people? What are we going to say? I'm sorry, I need to talk up. What do we say to people who are fearful in the church? I am important to the King. Do we believe we're important to God? I seriously mean that. I seriously ask that question. And we don't think, there you go. We don't understand how important. And when we don't think we're important, why? Why is that? Okay. 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 That's right. That's right. Yeah. Ah, and it's because we forget who gave us the clothes. It's not my righteousness. Right. Well, and I think it is connected to works. Our lack of worth is connected to what we can do instead of whose we are. And whose we are is based on what the Lord has given us. He has exchanged robes with us. He's given us that robe of righteousness. And he doesn't expect us to stay right there with the one little minus, right? Little mina, the little coin. He expects that to grow in us because he loves us enough not to leave us the way we are. So I think that this message is so much more important because things are not going to get better. And we need to think about that. We really need to think about what are we doing? What are we doing? Where is my worth and my value? What if I lose everything? I don't want to lose everything. I'm not asking for that. Please, God, you heard me right. But if I do, is my worth in what I do or who I am or what I own or where I go to church or what I drive? And we live in the richest nation in the world. It's hard. In Africa, my friend who's a missionary in Africa, we would talk about this, and she went 7 weeks in her apartment. She lives in the poorest town in Uganda, and they had no water. The pipe to the town broke, water pipe, whatever. For 7 weeks, she had to go down to the river with buckets and haul water back to her apartment. Oh no, for 7 weeks. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I could do that. I don't even camp. I don't even know how would I mean, I don't know. But she said, that's when you know God is really there for you, when he provides the water. And I said, man, that is so humbling because I'm like, if my air conditioner went out of my car, I don't know if I'd be driving down the road. Yeah. So I'm thankful that this isn't what we haven't done a lot of charts at this point. We're going to go back to charts. It's going to happen. Right. It is. We have, That's why this is important. That's why Romans 11 is so important. Yeah. Yeah. Right. That's right. It's good. It's a good thing. It's a good thing to talk about what we're studying in this way, because individually we're all going to go through it in some way. If the Lord doesn't return in our lifetime, I really do believe there's going to be a rapture in my lifetime. I really do believe that. If I'm wrong, okay, but how much worse will it have to get? I don't know. I have no idea. I don't know. I think we really are. Of course, Vicki and I had this conversation. You know that video you sent? Well, it didn't happen. It was supposed to happen in October. I said, well, you are right. It didn't happen, but that doesn't mean it isn't going to happen. It's a great study, but yeah. I think they're going to take our dogs. God's going to take our dogs with this. Yeah. Well, it's got to be my way. What are you talking about? That's right. That's right. That's right. Exactly. Yeah. That's so sweet. That's so nice. Yeah, that's true. Okay, well, let's pray and you guys let me know. And if you want to bring anybody to that tea, y'all let me know. But I think you will really enjoy it. Anyway, thank you so much for this class today. It was so good. So good. Father, I just thank you so much that you give us the confidence to trust you. That, Lord, even when I don't feel confident about what's going to happen, even when I am concerned about my checking account or my savings account, that you remind me once again that you, from before the foundation of the earth, even ordained, even planned for the sinfulness of man and salvation to come. You promised that the shepherd would be struck down and the sheep would be scattered. But then you also promised for a wedding, a reunion, a oneness, an incredible feast for eternity. Help us, Lord, to have the right perspective, the God perspective, the understanding that you are in charge. Really, we say that, but help us to really walk in that path. Help us to ask the question, are we like the Pharisees? Do we want control? Do we want power? Do we want things to go our way? Or are we saying, not my will, but thy will be done? Help us, Lord, to understand that. Keep teaching us, Father, so that you would be glorified. In Jesus' name, amen.